The evening was supposed to be simple, harmless, even comforting in its routine familiarity. A farewell dinner for a couple of old friends who were moving away. Nothing more than laughter, toasts, and memories retold under warm restaurant lights. We gathered in one of those bustling places downtown, where the chatter of conversations mixed with the clinking of silverware and the faint music spilling from hidden speakers. The room smelled of roasted meat and garlic bread, the kind of smell that settles into your jacket until the next day. Everyone seemed wrapped in joy, holding up glasses, recalling old jokes, filling the air with life. I should have been part of that rhythm, smiling and nodding along, but my focus kept slipping away from the conversation at our table and narrowing onto one thing. Claire. She sat across from me, radiant in her effortless way, hair perfectly in place, laughter at all the right moments, her hand brushing the stem of her wineglass as if she owned the entire evening. Yet, beneath the mask of lightness, I noticed something else. Her hand never left her phone. It lay beneath the tablecloth, half hidden on her lap, glowing now and then like a small secret lantern. She tilted her head down slightly each time the light appeared, eyes darting quickly over the screen, lips curving into faint private smiles that she didn't bother to share with anyone else around us. She thought she was discreet, but to me her movements were as obvious as fireworks in the night. At first, I told myself to ignore it. Everyone checks their phone during dinners. Maybe work had spilled over into her weekend again, or maybe it was some group chat about nothing important. I tried to convince myself it wasn't unusual, but when it happened again, and again, the glow of the screen cutting across her face in the dim light, something inside me tightened. Then it happened. The screen lit up long enough for me to catch the name. A name I didn't know, and beside it a small red heart. That was all, a name and a symbol, yet it landed like a punch to the chest. It was enough to make my pulse quicken, enough to pull me away from everything else in the room. My fork froze above my plate. My eyes locked on the device like it was evidence in a trial. A name. A heart. Why a heart? No one marks a colleague's number with a heart. No one marks a casual friend that way. That symbol is reserved for something closer, something more int asterisk mate. I asked her quietly, my voice low so that only she could hear, though my heart was pounding loud enough that I wondered if others might notice. I didn't accuse, didn't raise my voice. I just asked. She didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed. A light, dismissive laugh that seemed rehearsed, polished, like she had it prepared for just this kind of moment. It's nothing, she said, loud enough for the table to hear, brushing me off as if I were a child tugging at her sleeve. Work stuff. You're imagining things again. The words were a knife, but what hurt worse was how easily she twisted the scene. Within seconds, she turned my quiet question into an example of my paranoia. She said I was just looking for drama, just trying to spoil the evening. Her tone was amused, playful, but edged with superiority, and she made sure everyone at the table heard it. I felt the shift immediately. Eyes flicked toward me, then away, the way people glance at a stranger doing something embarrassing in public. A couple of our friends chuckled nervously, raising their glasses again as if to steer the mood back to lighter ground. But the damage was done. Claire had taken my genuine concern, my sudden stab of fear, and paraded it as foolish jealousy. In front of everyone, she had transformed me from the attentive husband into the insecure fool. She leaned back in her chair with a calm smile, sipping her wine as if nothing had happened, as if I had overreacted for no reason at all. Her posture was perfect. Relaxed shoulders, head tilted slightly, lips curved in ease. She knew how to play a role, and in that moment she played it flawlessly. Inside me, however, the scene was far from over. I could still see that name, still see the small glowing heart beside it. The image replayed again and again, burned into my mind like a brand. The noise of the restaurant faded. The laughter, the toasts, the music. It all collapsed into a dull murmur under the weight of my suspicion. I tried to convince myself that perhaps she was right. Perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps the name with the heart had some perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe a female friend's joke. Maybe an old contact from years ago she never thought to change. But the truth was, deep down, I knew better. My gut had never screamed so loud before. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I smiled when I needed to, lifted my glass at the right moments, nodded along to stories that I barely heard. Outwardly, I remained composed, but inside I was unraveling. I watched Claire more than I watched anyone else. I saw the way she slid her phone into her bag with deliberate casualness, the way she turned her face toward the group whenever she laughed, making sure her attention appeared evenly distributed. But I knew her performance by now. The smiles weren't shared with me. They were stolen from something hidden just beneath the tablecloth, from the secret life glowing on her screen. When the dinner ended and we stepped out into the cool night air, our friends hugged us both warmly, wishing us a safe drive home. Claire carried herself lightly, as if nothing had happened, chatting about trivial things, brushing hair from her face with the ease of someone unbothered. She had left no trace of the shift inside me. To her, it was done, deflected, dismissed, forgotten. But for me, the night had carved a fault line through the center of our marriage. The image of that name, that heart, and the way she turned me into the spectacle of the jealous husband in front of everyone. It refused to fade. Even as we walked together to the car, even as I unlocked the door for her, the thought pressed on me. This wasn't the first lie. It was simply the first I couldn't look away from. I drove us home in silence. She hummed softly beside me, scrolling through her phone again, the glow reflecting on her face. I didn't ask. I didn't say a word. The evening had taught me one thing. She knew exactly how to make me look small, how to twist suspicion into paranoia, how to play the role of the innocent wife while painting me as insecure. But behind her mask, I had glimpsed something undeniable. A slip of truth, a name with a heart, a sign that whatever we had was no longer ours alone. That night, I lay awake long after she fell asleep. Her phone rested on the nightstand, screen dark and silent now, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. The device looked harmless, almost fragile, yet I knew it held answers I wasn't ready to face. I stared at it for hours, the weight in my chest pressing heavier with each minute. I had no proof. No photographs, no confessions. Just a name, just a heart, just the memory of her laughter echoing over the clinking glasses as she made me look like a fool. But sometimes the smallest facts speak louder than all the evidence in the world. And I knew, whether or not I wanted to admit it yet, that something between us had already broken. After that farewell dinner, I found myself haunted. The evening might have passed for everyone else as just another cheerful gathering. But for me, it was the beginning of a slow unraveling. That image, Claire with her phone hidden under the table, the glow of the screen, the unfamiliar male name crowned with a heart, followed me like a ghost. I woke with it in the middle of the night, felt it when she walked past me in the kitchen, carried it like an invisible stone in my pocket wherever I went. It wasn't only that moment, though. What made it unbearable was the way my mind started dragging up every little detail I had brushed aside over the past months. One by one they surfaced, memories that had seemed trivial when they happened but now connected like shards of glass, forming a picture that cut deeper the longer I looked at it. The first thing that returned to me was her schedule. Claire had always been dedicated at work, but recently late meetings had become almost routine. Nights when she didn't come home until 10, sometimes later, carrying with her not just fatigue but something else. A brightness in her eyes, a tension in her body, as though she had been living another life before stepping through our door. I remembered how she would wave away my concern with quick explanations about urgent projects or colleagues in crisis. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But now I saw those nights differently. Then there was the perfume, a scent that clung to her clothes, rich and heavy, not the kind she ever wore herself. I noticed it once, then again and again. At first, I told myself she might have hugged a friend, brushed against someone in a crowded elevator, or tested a sample in a department store. The rationalizations were easy, too easy. But after the dinner, I couldn't fool myself anymore. The perfume wasn't random. It was deliberate. It wasn't hers, but it was on her like a signature. Her supposed weekends at the gym also came back to me in waves. Claire had claimed she wanted to take better care of herself, to feel energized and balanced. So she signed up for a membership at a place across town. I thought it was good for her, a healthy outlet, and I encouraged it. But then I noticed that her sports bag stayed untouched in the corner of our bedroom, sometimes for weeks at a time. On more than one occasion, I even peeked inside. Folded clothes exactly as I'd last seen them, sneakers clean and unworn. Yet every weekend she would slip out, saying she was going to work out. She returned hours later, flushed but not sweaty, carrying the same untouched bag. And I never asked. Her phone, too, had transformed. Once it had been something casual, left on the counter, forgotten on the couch. We used to scroll through each other's pictures, laugh at old texts, share playlists. But gradually it became her constant companion, always in her pocket, always face down when she set it on a table. Even in the shower she brought it with her, placing it on the bathroom shelf within arm's reach, as if it were oxygen she couldn't survive without. I remember standing outside the bathroom door once, hearing the faint buzz of a notification and then the quick shuffle of her movement behind the curtain. It unsettled me, but I convinced myself it was nothing worth troubling over. One particular memory stood out more than the rest. A Sunday afternoon, months earlier, when I had returned from running errands. I walked into the kitchen and noticed 2 wine glasses on the table, still faintly smudged with lipstick. The light streaming through the window made them glow like evidence in plain sight. I hadn't had a drink that day. I asked her about it and she brushed it off, laughing, saying she had poured 1 glass for herself, then decided she didn't want it, and absent-mindedly poured another later. It was clumsy, but I let it go. I didn't want to seem suspicious over something so small. Now, looking back, that image of the glasses seemed louder than any explanation she'd given. Other things surfaced, too, like shadows I had ignored. Her sudden interest in clothes that didn't match her everyday life. Dresses that looked meant for dinners out, not board meetings. Shoes that seemed designed for attention, not comfort. The way she sometimes returned home late at night and her hair looked freshly styled, as if she had been preparing for a second evening rather than coming back from work. The times she slipped into another room to take a phone call. Her voice lowered, tone soft, laughter muffled. When I asked later, she said it was a client, or a friend I didn't know, or sometimes no one important. Even her online habits had shifted. She spent hours scrolling, messaging, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen deep into the night. Our shared tablet, once open to both of us, now carried a new password she never explained. Every piece, once dismissed, now aligned into something sharper. It was like watching a puzzle assemble itself from fragments I had been too blind to put together. And the more it assembled, the more I realized how many times I had chosen not to see. Perhaps the cruelest part of memory is not that it brings back the past, but that it reinterprets it. What once looked innocent now appeared suspicious. What once felt secure now trembled with doubt. I saw myself in those moments, nodding at her explanations, accepting her stories, ignoring the heaviness in my gut. I had been complicit in my own deception. The worst of it wasn't the individual memories. It was the pattern they formed, the consistency of it all. Each late night, each excuse, each hidden phone call, each unexplained perfume. They weren't isolated anymore. They belonged to a rhythm, a structure, a life she was building alongside ours. And I realized I had been walking through a house of mirrors, each reflection warped but convincing enough to keep me moving forward. Now the glass had cracked, and I could see behind it. I began to notice things in real time, too, not just in memory. The way her face lit up at certain notifications, the way she left the house with sudden urgency on weekends, the way her explanations grew shorter the more questions I asked. It was as though she knew I was beginning to see the seams in her story, and her strategy was to smother my suspicion with silence. Every night I lay awake beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering if she dreamed of me or of someone else. My mind became a reel of images. The wine glasses, the untouched gym bag, the perfume, the late returns, the glowing phone. They ran in circles until sleep became impossible. Suspicion is a poison, and once it enters your blood, it spreads to every corner. I could no longer look at Claire without wondering what was hidden behind her smile. I could no longer hear her laugh without thinking of the whispers she shared on calls behind closed doors. Each moment with her felt like a negotiation between my desire to believe and the truth pressing harder against the walls of denial. And yet, despite all this, I told no one. To friends, to neighbors, to colleagues, we remained the same couple. Smiling, hosting dinners, showing up at family gatherings. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. It was as if I lived in two worlds. The world where my wife was still mine, and the world where she belonged to someone else. And I knew that sooner or later, those two worlds would collide. It happened on an ordinary weekday evening, the kind of day where nothing seemed different until the ground gave way beneath my feet. I had left work earlier than usual. A meeting had been canceled, and instead of staying behind to fill the hours with paperwork, I decided to drive home. I told myself it would be a pleasant surprise for Claire. Maybe I'd bring dinner, maybe we'd spend a rare quiet night together. I stopped by a small deli near our house, picked up her favorite sandwiches, and drove back with a sense of anticipation that almost felt like hope. But when I pulled into our street, something made me pause. It was the light in the living room, warm, golden, flickering through the curtains. At that hour, Claire shouldn't have been home yet. She had told me she had a late meeting. My first thought was simple. Perhaps her plans had changed. But then I noticed the second detail. Two shadows moving behind the glass. I stepped out of the car slowly, deli bag still in my hand. My heart began to pound. Not with the vague anxiety of suspicion, but with a sharp, physical rhythm that I couldn't control. Each step toward the house felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened around me. I didn't want to believe what I already knew deep down. When I reached the front path, I stopped. Through the side window, I had a clear view of the living room. And there they were. Claire sat on the couch, not across from her colleague, but right next to him. Their bodies close, shoulders touching. Her hand rested in his, fingers intertwined as naturally as if they had always belonged together. He leaned toward her, saying something that made her laugh. Her head tilted back in that unguarded way I hadn't seen in years. The sight was devastating in its simplicity. There were no stolen kisses, no dramatic embraces. Just two people sitting together, sharing laughter and closeness, in a space that was supposed to be mine. And in that moment, I understood that every doubt, every suspicion, every memory that had haunted me was real. She hadn't only lied. She had built a second life right inside the walls of my home. I stood frozen, unable to move, my breath fogging the glass. The deli bag slipped slightly in my grip, the sandwiches inside suddenly ridiculous, meaningless tokens of a life that no longer existed. My chest felt hollow, as if all the air had been ket out of me, leaving only silence. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, maybe minutes. Time seemed to collapse around me. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to tear apart the scene in front of me. But another part of me held back, whispering that I didn't need words. The truth was already there, undeniable, clear as day. Claire leaned closer to him, whispering something that made his face break into a grin. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed it lightly, and she didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned further into him, eyes closed, savoring the Macy. That gesture, more than anything, was the final blow. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't something she could laugh away or twist into paranoia. It was love, or at least something close enough to it. And it wasn't mine. I turned away, stepping back into the cold air of the evening. My legs carried me toward the car without thought. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barking in the distance, the faint hum of a television from another house. To anyone else, it was an ordinary evening. But for me, the world had ended. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale, hollow-eyed, almost unrecognizable. I tried to breathe, but each inhale came jagged, like glass against my lungs. All the pieces from the past months rushed back, crashing over me in a wave I couldn't hold back. The perfume, the late meetings, the untouched gym bag, the laughter behind closed doors, the name with a heart. They weren't fragments anymore. They were a story, and it had just reached its climax. I thought of the way she had laughed at me in front of our friends, how easily she had turned me into the jealous husband while hiding this life behind my back. I thought of the nights I had waited for her, convincing myself she was working late. I thought of the mornings when I kissed her goodbye, not knowing she belonged to someone else. And now, sitting in the car, I realized I had been living in a lie for longer than I dared to count. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. Eventually, I drove away, the deli bag still untouched on the passenger seat. I didn't go far, just to a quiet parking lot where I sat under the dull glow of a street lamp, staring out at nothing. I felt empty, but not in the way grief feels. This was sharper, like a wound freshly opened. When I finally returned home later that night, the living room was dark. The guest had gone, and Claire was upstairs, already in bed. She stirred slightly when I entered, murmuring something about being tired, her voice thick with feigned drowsiness. I didn't answer, couldn't. I simply lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, the image of her on the couch replaying endlessly in my mind. The next morning, she behaved as though nothing had happened. She made coffee, scrolled through her phone, hummed a tune. I watched her, studying every movement, every gesture, searching for cracks in her mask. But she was flawless, as if years of deception had trained her to perfection. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I might have believed her act. But I had seen, and once you see, you cannot unsee. That day marked a turning point. Suspicion had become certainty. The shadows I once tried to rationalize had turned into a blazing flash of truth. My wife was unfaithful, and she had been for longer than I could measure. I had been nothing more than a prop in the theater of her double life. And no matter how much she smiled, no matter how easily she slipped into the role of the perfect wife, the memory of her hand in his, the sound of her laughter in his presence, would remain etched in me forever. From the moment I saw Claire's hand clasped in his, something inside me closed like a door that would never open again. I didn't confront her that night. Not in the heat of discovery, not while she had the advantage of denial at her fingertips. Instead, I carried the truth like a silent P*N, waiting for the right moment to step back from the performance she had orchestrated for so long. But when that moment came, when my silence turned into distance, Claire reacted not with guilt or confession, but with something far colder. Calculation. She must have sensed the shift almost immediately. The air between us changed. I no longer asked where she had been or why she came home late. I no longer played the part of the gullible husband absorbing her stories. Instead, I withdrew into myself. My answers grew short, my tone cool, my eyes unwilling to meet hers. And rather than bridging the gap, she turned it into ammunition. Soon enough, the whispers began. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues of hers. They started to treat me differently, offering awkward smiles, glances tinged with pity, voices weighted with assumptions. At first, I couldn't understand. But then I overheard it at a gathering. Claire telling her version of the story. She wasn't the betrayer. She was the abandoned wife, the woman shackled to a husband who had grown cold and indifferent. She painted herself as the victim of neglect, a woman who had tried everything to hold her marriage together while I pulled away. The audacity was breathtaking. She took my silence, my attempt to preserve dignity in the face of betrayal, and twisted it into evidence of my cruelty. To those who listened, I was the one who had ruined the marriage. I was the one who had stopped caring. I became, in her telling, the ghost that haunted her life, the man who had left her no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere. It would have been laughable if it weren't so effective. People wanted to believe her. She was charming, articulate, led at weaving words into nets that trapped sympathy. When she looked someone in the eye and sighed about her husband's distance, about his jealousy, about his constant suspicion, they nodded and patted her hand, eager to be on her side. They didn't know that her smile in those moments was the same one she wore when she mocked me in front of friends at the dinner table, when she dismissed the heart on her phone as nothing, I tried to keep to myself, but the rumors trickled back to me. A neighbor mentioning in passing that Claire had been through so much. A friend hesitating before inviting me somewhere, as though unsure whose side to choose. Even family gatherings turned sour, filled with half-truths she had whispered into ears before I arrived. Through it all, one memory anchored me. The scene through the window. Claire on the couch, her hand locked with his, her laughter spilling out like it belonged to another world. That memory was untouchable, immune to her manipulations. No matter what story she told, no matter how many people she convinced, she could never erase what I had seen with my own eyes. But knowing the truth didn't make it easier to live with. Each time I heard another version of her tale, I felt the sting of humiliation all over again. Not only had she betrayed me, she had stripped me of the right to be seen as the wronged one. She had stolen the narrative and rewritten it in her favor, leaving me cast as the villain in a story that was never mine to begin with. Her performance extended into every corner of our lives. She would greet neighbors with a soft, weary smile, her voice tinged with practiced sorrow. She would post pictures online of herself looking contemplative, accompanied by cryptic captions about endurance and finding strength. She crafted an image of resilience, of a woman bravely carrying the weight of an unloving husband. And behind closed doors, she played the same games, alternating between icy silence and bursts of false warmth, as though daring me to challenge her version of reality. I couldn't. Part of me feared that speaking out would only make me look more bitter, more jealous, more like the caricature she had already drawn of me. So I held my tongue, clung to my silence, and let her spin her web. Perhaps that was cowardice. Or perhaps it was the only way to preserve what little strength I had left. But silence doesn't protect you. It only leaves space for lies to grow. The more I withdrew, the louder her voice became. Soon people stopped asking me what had happened. They already knew. They had Claire's story, polished and perfect, served with a smile and the occasional glimmer of tears. It was in those moments, surrounded by whispers I couldn't control, that I understood the depth of her betrayal. It wasn't only her body she had given to another man. It was the truth itself. She had taken it, twisted it, nized it, and turned it against me. One evening, walking home past the flickering street lamps, I heard two neighbors talking on their porch. They didn't see me, and their voices carried easily in the cool air. "Poor Claire," one said, shaking her head. "Imagine being married to someone so cold. No wonder she looked so sad." The words pierced me more sharply than the sight through the window ever had. Betrayal in private is one thing. Betrayal performed for an audience is another. That night I lay awake again, the ceiling above me blank and unyielding. Claire slept beside me, her breathing even, her face calm. To anyone looking, we might have seemed like any married couple sharing a bed after a long day. But inside me, everything had shifted. The woman beside me was no longer my wife. She was an actress playing a role, a puppeteer pulling strings in a play where I had been cast as the fool. And yet, beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation, I held on to one thing, the memory of what I had seen. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't neglect. It was betrayal, plain and undeniable. And though she could rewrite the story for everyone else, she could never rewrite it for me. In that realization, there was a strange kind of strength. As painful as it was to be misunderstood, as lonely as it was to carry the truth alone, I knew I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the heart on her phone, the scent on her clothes, the untouched gym bag, the 2 wine glasses, the shadow in the window. The truth belonged to me, and no rumor could take it away. Still, I wondered how long I could bear it. How long could I live with the weight of her lies pressing down on me, suffocating me in my own home? How long could I endure the charade of dinners, neighbors, gatherings where everyone thought they knew the story but didn't? How long before the silence that shielded me also consumed me? The answers didn't come that night. But one thing had become clear. My marriage had ended not in private, not in int*Macy, but in the public theater of her deceit. And if I was to survive it, I would have to find a way to step off her stage and write my own ending. Emptiness. That was the first feeling that settled into me after the storm of betrayal and the noise of whispers faded. Not anger, not even sorrow anymore, just emptiness. It was like standing in a house after the fire has burned through. Nothing left but ashes, silence, and the sharp smell of what used to be. For weeks, I wandered through my own days like a ghost, barely aware of the hours passing, barely caring whether the world outside still spun. Claire, of course, continued her performance. She reached out with carefully chosen words, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always aimed at pulling me back into the script she had written. One day she would text me lines soaked in guilt, apologies painted with dramatics about how she was misunderstood and how I had misread everything. The next day her messages shifted into mockery, accusing me of weakness, of cowardice, of giving up too easily. And then, almost without transition, she would try to drape herself in sorrow, writing that I had broken her heart and that she didn't deserve such cruelty. For a while, each word still struck me like a stone. I'd stare at my phone, emotions twisting, tempted to answer, to defend myself, to scream the truth into her face. But gradually something inside me began to change. The more she reached out, the more I realized that responding only gave her power. Every message, every phone call was a hook, and each time I reacted, I let her pull me back into the game. So I stopped. At first, the silence felt unnatural, like holding my breath underwater. The phone buzzed, and my hand twitched automatically, aching to pick it up, to read, to respond. But I forced myself not to. I turned the screen face down, let the sound fade into the background. The first day I did it, I walked around the house restless, pacing like an animal in a cage. But when nothing collapsed, when the world didn't end, I realized the silence had done something remarkable. It had freed me. The emptiness that had filled me at the beginning started to shift. Slowly, piece by piece, it was replaced by clarity. I began to see the years of my marriage not as a sanctuary, as I had once believed, but as a long stretch of small humiliations I had endured without realizing. Every deflection, every half-truth, every time she laughed at my concern or twisted my doubt into jealousy, all of it had been poison dripping steadily into me. And now, without her voice filling the air, I could finally hear my own thoughts. I started to notice things about myself I had ignored for years. How I had silenced my instincts to keep peace. How I had trained myself to believe her explanations, even when my gut screamed otherwise. How I had allowed myself to shrink, to live as if my role was to accommodate her moods and cover her tracks. It was painful to see, but also liberating. Awareness, once it arrives, doesn't leave. With that awareness came strength. I found I could look at her without flinching, without questioning whether I had overreacted. I no longer needed to prove to myself that the betrayal was real. The scene through the window, the name with the heart, the perfume, the lies, they were enough. And because I no longer doubted myself, I no longer needed her validation, her words, or her attention. It was strange how quickly life shifted once I stopped giving her power. Her calls went unanswered. Her texts piled up, some long, some short, some so desperate they almost seemed foreign coming from her. She tried every strategy: guilt, anger, seduction, mockery, but silence became my shield. The less I engaged, the more she flailed. And the more she flailed, the more I realized how deeply she depended on the stage she had built, the audience she had always needed. Without me reacting, her performance lost meaning. I began filling the silence with new rituals. At first, they were small. Morning walks before work, coffee made slowly, intentionally, with the radio off so I could hear the world outside. I sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sky shift from gold to gray to black, something I hadn't done in years. There was still loneliness, but it was a different kind, a loneliness that carried space within it, space I could finally breathe in. The more distance I created, the more the truth sharpened. I saw that my marriage had not only been broken by infidelity, but that it had long been eroded by neglect disguised as normalcy. Claire hadn't just betrayed me with another man. She had betrayed me each time she dismissed my voice, each time she turned my worry into a joke, each time she chose to humiliate me rather than share herself honestly. Those wounds had been small, subtle, almost invisible at the time. But now, with clarity, I could trace them all, and I realized they had been cutting me long before I ever saw her on that couch. And yet, instead of breaking me, this clarity gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. I began to imagine a life without the constant second-guessing, without the shadows of suspicion, without the careful monitoring of her moods and movements. A life where I could live not as a suspect or a prop, but as a person whole in himself. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't throw away the remnants of our life together all at once. But little by little, I let go. Her pictures came down from the shelves. Her voice faded from my phone. Her presence in my mind became less of a torment and more of a lesson. A brutal, unforgettable lesson about truth, trust, and the cost of silence. There were nights when grief still came, heavy and unexpected. Nights when I lay awake, remembering the early days of our marriage, the warmth that had once been real before it soured into pretense. I let those memories come, let them sting, but I no longer clung to them. They were part of a past that had ended, not a future I owed myself to rebuild. Gradually, the emptiness that had once swallowed me whole began to fill with something else. Not joy yet, not even hope, but strength. A strength built on survival, on refusing to be the fool in her play any longer. A strength that whispered I didn't have to carry her lies with me into the next chapter. By the time weeks had passed, Claire's attempts to reach me had grown sparse. The messages stopped being daily, then weekly, until eventually the silence came from her side as well. Perhaps she had given up. Perhaps she had found someone else to perform for. It didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for her explanation, her approval, her attention. I wasn't waiting at all. For the first time, I was free. During my silence, Melissa, Claire's sister, reached out. She confessed she had long known about Claire's secret meetings, but had stayed quiet out of fear. Now, with the truth exposed, she chose honesty. We began spending time together, at first cautiously, then with ease. She wasn't Claire's shadow, but her opposite. Honest, steady, unwilling to play games. For the first time, I felt seen, not deceived. When our bond became known, Claire's family turned on Melissa, and Claire herself sent me messages full of venom and mockery. But I no longer reacted. Silence was my shield, and truth was my anchor. Rumors swirled in town. People whispered, yet none of it mattered. Standing beside me was someone who had broken free of lies, just as I had. Betrayal had ended one life, but honesty opened another. I was no longer a victim, I was finally free.